I kept saying it really hurt. Well, this went on for 2 hours. And at the end of 2 hours,
No one is paying attention to you saying, I am in excruciating pain.
People would come over. There were multiple nurses in the room. And like I said, they were all, absorbed with this big baby. And occasionally a nurse would come over when I would say something and they'd just be like, in fact, I was offered a Motrin. So here, have a Motrin. And I was like, yeah, Motrin this is not the level of pain I'm talking about.
When we speak the truth of what we lived, we offer others a way through. This is Hope Comes to Visit, and I'm Danielle Elliott-Smith. Today's guest is Jenny Hoffman. She's the founder of Story of Strength, inspiring a movement to normalize conversations and advocate for better maternal health, especially around preventable complications. Let's take a quick moment to thank the people that support and sponsor the podcast. When life takes an unexpected turn, you deserve someone who will stand beside you. St. Louis attorney Chris Dully offers experienced one-on-one legal defense. Call 314-384-4000 or 314-DUI-HELP, or you can visit dullylawfirm.com. That's DULLE lawfirm.com for a free consultation. Jenny, thank you so much for being here. I am so looking forward to having this conversation. When I first heard about the work you are doing, I was mesmerized by the overlap in my personal experience, and I'm in love with the work you are doing because I think it is so important that we share these stories. So thank you for being here.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so let's dive right in. Let's talk about the website that you have and the work that you are doing and how it came to be. So let's talk about you. So let's share your experience. What drove you to start this work?
So what drove me to start my work was actually my own personal experience. So warning in case this is triggering for anyone, I experienced postpartum complications. So when I was having my first daughter, I had a low-risk pregnancy, no risk factors at all. And my labor was long, but everything went smoothly. And then after I delivered, I started experiencing pain worse than I had ever felt when I was laboring. And I was trying to describe it. I can give you my background as well, but my job was working with some of the world's leading physicians to develop new medical devices. So I was comfortable talking to physicians and being in operating rooms. And I was trying to describe that my pain was 10 times worse than I had ever experienced and 10 times worse than in labor. And the reaction I got was like, yes, you just had a baby and you're a new mom. So there's some pain. And I was like, no, this is 10 times worse. And I kept trying to just surface this pain. And
at what point were you having this? Was this right after birth or like you were?
This was right after birth.
Okay.
Probably like just a few minutes had passed. Like I saw the baby, she was big, 8 pounds, 15 ounces, and we were at high altitude. So all the nurses were around her and my husband was around her, like so excited by such a big baby.
Okay.
And within a few minutes, they come to try to press on your uterus to get it to start decreasing in size. And I couldn't even stand that. I couldn't stand any pressure on my belly at all. And that's when, I kept saying it really hurt. Well, this went on for 2 hours. And at the end of 2 hours,
no one is paying attention to you saying, I am in excruciating pain.
People would come over. There were multiple nurses in the room. And like I said, they were all, absorbed with this big baby. And occasionally a nurse would come over when I would say something and they'd just be like, in fact, I was offered a Motrin. So here, have a Motrin. And I was like, yeah, Motrin this is not the level of pain I'm talking about. Like
I'm laughing because I'm not laughing because it's funny, but laughing at the audacity of have a Motrin, you just had a baby. And yes. It's like, here's a Tylenol for your broken femur, right? I mean,
it's exactly like that. That's such a good way to describe it. So after 2 hours, I let out a scream. I felt like it was the end of what I could do. It was like my final reach. And it sounded, people described it in the room as like an animal being mauled to death.
Right. Feral.
And I felt like I wasn't going to be there to take care of my daughter. And so I asked my husband for my phone so I could call my mom. My mom was not in the delivery room with me. And I called her and I couldn't even speak. I just had this scream. And she asked him, "Is that Jenny?" And he was like, "Yes, it is." And she was like, "I'll be there as soon as I can." Luckily, she had already traveled to my house, which is 17 minutes from the hospital. So I knew this was 4 a.m. now. So I knew I had to make it 17 minutes. And I could see the clock on the wall. And I am now just trying to make it 17 minutes for my mom to get there. And I knew when she came in the room, I can tell you about my mom as well, but she is a powerhouse. And so she came in and she was like, "You get the doctor now. You need to go get help now. Like this needs," like she just made it happen. So the doctor came back. She had gone home. She came back. And as soon as she came in, they realized that I had been bleeding the whole time, but I had been bleeding internally. So it was all pooling inside. And that's why there hadn't been external signs or external visible signs. And so it became an emergency situation right away. So they were doing the procedure. We couldn't get into an operating room. We couldn't get any anesthesia then. And they were just pulling out blood and clots and trying to get the bleeding to stop. And I just remember that being the most painful experience I've ever had.
See, what's extraordinary to me is, so I shared with you a little bit of my experience before we went on air, and what you're describing is exactly what happened to me. But it's so I hemorrhaged right after, but they spent a lot of time trying to stop my bleeding. Like I lost 60% of blood in delivery. And it took her a very long time to stop the bleeding. I mean, it was, at the point, and I couldn't feel anything at that moment because I'd had the epidural and they'd actually had to turn my epidural off because they recognized it was working, quote unquote, too well. I had zero feeling whatsoever. My hip almost fell out of socket when they went to check me because it had gone too well. They punctured my spinal fluid area. And so they turned everything off, but I couldn't feel anything. And I was watching her and I was like, "Is your entire fist?" And she said, "Honey, I am working so hard on you right now," because she was massaging my uterus to get the bleeding to stop. And I wasn't even allowed to touch Delaney initially. One of the intern nurses tried to bring Delaney over to me, my daughter. And the doctor looked at her and said, "Not right now," like through clenched teeth, because they didn't want her anywhere near me because she was trying to get the bleeding to stop. Well, eventually they did. They packed me. And then I experienced that same level of pain. And I kept saying, "There is something wrong." And they kept saying, "No, it's fine. It's just because you're packed because of the bleeding, because of the hemorrhaging." But I was bleeding internally the same way. And so when we had first communicated about you hemorrhaging, I was imagining your hemorrhaging was immediately after, the same way mine was, and that they stopped the bleeding. I didn't equate it to the internal, therefore the pain that I experienced. I mean, I have chills because that was exactly the internal piece that isn't visible, that no one believes.
I can't believe how similar our stories are as well. But actually, I guess I learned that as I started sharing my story, I wish we were the only two who had this story. And yet I found we're not.
So to this point, so this is why I love that another reason that I love that you're doing this. Up until now, I hadn't encountered anyone else who I have chills again. This piece, where I had to fight to say, "No, I swear, I have a high pain tolerance. There is something wrong." And my husband kept walking out and saying, "No, really, there's something wrong." And his family came in and I was white as a ghost. And so they came in and I couldn't have people in and they left. And his mom later was very upset that we said, no, go ahead, go home, because she could tell something was wrong, but didn't know what. And it was only because I finally begged them to check that one of the nurses could see that the internal hematoma was pushing its way out, that they ended up calling all the doctors back in. And then I was brought into emergency surgery. It was because the internal bleeding was becoming externally visible that they were able to see that there was an issue.
So symbolic when we're experiencing internal complications and then have to advocate for ourselves so that others can see it. And when I wasn't strong enough, then I had to call my mom, who could be my strength for me.
Right.
And, my story continued that actually, so we stopped the bleeding enough, but I continued to bleed and had to go back for a D&C at 10 weeks postpartum. There was still placenta remaining, even though we had done the bedside procedure. So it continued for quite some time. So in the hospital, the first time I lost 2.2 liters of blood. I was given 3 units of blood then to help me. And I just still felt so weak, so much pain. Again, that feeling of I knew something was wrong. So even at my 6-week postpartum visit, I had to advocate for myself and I had to, really demand an ultrasound. And as soon as the ultrasound turned on, I knew, you could see it on the technician's face that there was something wrong. And I knew that I was going to have to go to surgery again.
So what would you say to people about advocating for themselves? Because it's interesting. My husband at the time is now my ex-husband, still a very good friend of mine. He said to me the next day, because he had always operated as doctors know best.
Yes.
The next day he looked at me and said, I will never again doubt you. I will never again doubt when you say we have to advocate for ourselves, because they ended up taking me into emergency surgery. They did it when he had gone downstairs into the chapel to pray because he had just reached out. Like, I don't know what else to do. Nobody's listening. And when he came back, the doctor was coming out of surgery and she just walked up to hug him. He thought I died. And she walked up to hug him because she was just so relieved that I was okay, that everything had gone fine. But he said to me, I'll never again doubt you. Like, if we have to advocate for ourselves, we have to advocate for ourselves. If we know something is wrong, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to trust our kids when they know something is wrong. What do you say to people to get them to believe themselves and how to push?
It's such a good question, because I really took this experience as, what do I learn about myself and how can I then help others based on this experience? Because I don't want it to be needless suffering. And one of the things that I learned about myself was, 1, that I'm stronger than I ever knew. And 2, that I could live with less fear. I had been through the near-death experience. So all those things that we're afraid to do, forget that fear, just try it. But 3 is to really listen to my gut. Because I was right. I knew something. And I've had those types of experience, whether it's in a professional life or a personal experience, where you have a gut feeling and sometimes you don't always listen to it. And my learning in this was, I don't blame a physician or a particular hospital or anything. I think this is a challenge of the system. And as a system, we need to figure out how to improve women's health. And so to me, it's then, how do we empower women to believe in yourself and trust your gut? Because you know yourself more than anyone else is going to know you. And you're often right. You're right far more than you're ever wrong. And there's far little risk in being wrong there. So you might as well advocate for yourself and trust in yourself. And that gave me this strength and courage that is a force.
That is, I love that so much, because I think that we regularly doubt ourselves, right?
Yes.
And the pushback that we get, if you think about just our 2 experiences, right? You're offered a Motrin, they said to me, well, hon, you're at seizure level for morphine. We can't give you any more. There's enough morphine in your system to knock out a 350-pound football player. We can't give you any more. And I said, I don't want any more. Because there was something in me that knew if I went to sleep, I wasn't going to be okay. Had I gone to sleep, I wouldn't have been okay. I needed to stay awake to keep getting someone to pay attention. And it's crazy, right? Because if I'd gone to sleep, I would have died in my sleep, right?
I got chills again. Again, right? You know yourself.
And my daughter would have been without a mother, right? It's like this internal clock in you is saying, keep fighting.
That's what it was. Keep fighting.
And so I did. And like you, I don't blame anyone because everyone is going based on what they know. I can remember a doctor friend of mine telling me at one point, she was an OB or is an OB. And she said, before I was pregnant myself, I was going based on what I'd learned in school, in books. And then once I was pregnant, I realized there was a piece of me that had been lying to my patients because they would say they were experiencing XYZ. And I would say, oh, no, you're not. And it wasn't until I was pregnant that I thought, oh my gosh, they actually do feel this way. And then I think about all of the male doctors over the years that must have said, oh, no, you don't, because they were treating bladder infections and menopause and menstrual cycles and childbirth. And there's no actual experience, right? And what you are giving voice to with the work you're doing is saying, I see you, I hear you, it's valid, keep fighting. What have you learned through putting these stories together and giving voice to these experiences?
The first thing that I'd say is you matter. And that's the broader you as well as you individually. You matter and your story matters. And I learned that because I started actually just sharing my story with my coworkers because I was diagnosed with PTSD from the experience. And so I would get triggered if I felt like I was not heard. And so I wanted people around me to understand when I might have a reaction and why that was. And that was very vulnerable for me to start sharing. But when I started sharing my story, then other women started opening up and being like, oh, I actually experienced something similar. And I experienced this complication. And maybe it was different, but it was another complication. And I realized that there were so many stories like ours. And we have a louder voice together, a stronger voice together. We can amplify our voices together. So the first thing that I learned, so I then read this article that maybe some of you have read it about the McKinsey Health Institute created a blueprint on the gap in women's health. And amongst many things, it's a wonderful read. But one of the things they highlight is data being a critical gap to improving women's health, that we don't have the data to really understand what is the true incidence and impact. Well, my PhD is in bioengineering, and I, wrote peer-reviewed journal articles and have, done engineering and science research before. And so I was like, that's a gap we can address. If data is the gap, I'll start there. Because if data is what's required to that drive awareness so that there's then future investment and innovation, let's start getting the data. And so I started reaching out to others to collect their stories. And the first thing I saw in these stories is that there were a lot of themes that were very similar. Number one, the percentage of postpartum hemorrhage, it still is the leading cause of maternal mortality throughout the world. And it's a lot of these complications are preventable, or at least don't have to get as serious as they often get, like in our stories. And I found that the trauma people experienced was lingering, like mine was. And that helped me realize that I was not alone and I could relate to other people too. And in destigmatizing telling the story, it just made such a difference in the recovery for each of us.
I love that. So it's Storytelling is heart work for me, right? That's
Yes.
the genesis of this podcast, right? I find that the most powerful thing that someone can hear is things they already know. Basically, it's my story coming out of your mouth, right? It's being able to hear you tell a story and I get to hear and think, wow, I'm not alone, right? I thought this was a Danielle thing and it's a universal thing. It's something that someone else is experiencing and therefore I'm not alone. And that is my hope with the podcast, right? That each episode we share, each person I get the privilege of interviewing is sharing an experience that meets someone somewhere where they are. And they can turn around and say, oh my gosh, I know someone else who needs to hear this. I know someone who had this experience, or there will be someone who has an experience similar to yours and they had no idea that it was causing them PTSD. And they'll hear that and a light bulb will go off and they'll think, wow, okay, no wonder I feel that way. No wonder I feel really triggered when I recognize that people aren't hearing me. It goes back to that experience in the hospital when I had my daughter 6 years ago, 10 years ago, 14 years ago, right? What I hope is that these stories are aha moments for people that make them feel seen and heard in a way that they weren't feeling before, which is very similar to the reason that you're doing the work you're doing, right? And that's the power of storytelling. It's the power of being vulnerable and collecting the stories and sharing them, right? So when you started to collect this data, what are you doing with the data? Who are you passing it on to hopefully create the change that you know needs to be created?
First, I want to say that the way you described hoping that somebody hears that they have a similar story and they are not alone, that's the whole reason I do this work. It's been 9 years since my daughter was born. So it's taken me those years to get to a place where I could share this story without being as triggered. And when I started analyzing the stories, I actually called my coworker at one point and was like, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it because it's so hard to relive these experiences. And so she was like, take a moment, don't try to get through too much in a day, and you can do this. And I realized I really could. I had that strength again, and I could learn to live with empathy and my heart on my sleeve as well. And
well, you very much can and very clearly do. And I think what you're doing is powerful. And like I said, being able to share that story. And even when you said, like, I find that as I'm interviewing people and my hope that this meets someone else, I recognize that each time I'm talking to somebody, I'm met. I'm learning something. I'm feeling a bit of what I hope someone else will feel. And when you said that the PTSD piece, like the being triggered when you're not heard, I thought, oh, that's where it comes from. And those are the pieces that I hope other people feel, right? And that it's validating for me all over again, each and every time. And I recognize that every time I get those little moments of chills, okay, there it is. Like, this is what I'm doing this for. I want people to feel seen and heard. And it's because people like you are doing that work, that they are out there being vulnerable and saying, I was terrified and this was hard and I didn't think I could do the hard things. And guess what? I can't.
Exactly. So with the data, we have about 200 stories. And I was actually, my call just before this was working with a data scientist on analyzing the data that we have. We've just done the first analysis of the first 100 stories. So we've looked at things like, what are some of those early signs that women get? What could we help the healthcare system be aware of and maybe pay more attention to? What were some of the long-term effects that then could drive future innovation? So the stories I got were not only postpartum hemorrhage. The other, leading cause of maternal morbidity and mortality is also preeclampsia. So there are certainly plenty of stories about preeclampsia as well. So first, I analyzed all the stories together and found some common themes. Secondly, I then did a sub-analysis on each of those patient populations. And we're finding fascinating things. So for example, trauma is a common experience across both. I also would say change in birth plan. So many of us are taught to create a birth plan, and then people said, I had to throw my birth plan out the window, and I had to do that as well. And so knowing that ahead of time is really useful if that might happen. But the third piece then, I think, is really realizing that the trauma actually was a larger percentage of the postpartum hemorrhage stories than the overall population, and was actually a much smaller percentage for the preeclampsia patient. Well, that gives us some interesting information, because that actually tells us that diagnosing some of these postpartum hemorrhage cases right away is what's critical when seconds matter. So knowing that you should advocate for yourself right when you get that feeling of something being wrong is actually critical. And don't stop, don't give up. And then the way we can bring in technology and education. So education for all of the healthcare providers in the room to know that when a patient says they're feeling something's wrong, even if maybe it's a headache or maybe it's pain, and pain and headache might be things that you experience naturally in childbirth, but also they might be signaling a bigger problem. So it's worth investigating those right away. Those are some of the insights we're getting.
So what I love about this, so the work I'm doing right now includes zero data, right? So I am strictly on the right brain, emotional, sensitive, love, heart-centered side of all of this storytelling. You are using your brilliance in addition to the storytelling. You have decided that you would like to really affect change on top of making people feel seen and heard. And I love that so much. There is this piece of you that said, I want people to feel seen and heard, but I also think the system is broken. And I don't like how I felt and how I was treated and what went wrong. And I know that it's happening to other people. How can I change that? And you're finding a way. And that is extraordinary.
That's it exactly. Whatever voice I have, whatever voices I can amplify, let's use those to make the future better, because most of these experiences could be prevented for future women, and no one should have to go through an experience like the two of us have, and many others have as well. And so my goal is to use this data to influence policymakers. There's groups like Women Health Advocates that I'm part of, and there's also innovation that could be inspired too. So I work a lot in early stage medical devices. So venture capitalists, I want you to know that there's a real need here. There's a real opportunity. Put investment into these spaces.
So, okay, on that end, how can the collective we support what you're doing? Do you need additional stories? Are you eventually looking for venture capital? Are you looking for venture capital now? What do you need?
Thank you for asking that. First of all, I am always looking for new stories, because I believe that the more data we have, the more powerful it is and we get more insights. So always looking for more stories. You can go to the website, www.storyofstrength.com, and you can put your story in there. The second is...
And so that's, well, before you go to the second, so the stories are any stories regarding maternal health, maternal experiences, maternal complications.
That's right. Any maternal experience that you had that didn't go as you expected and planned.
Perfect. Okay.
And you can insert your story online, and we'll make sure that it's included and analyzed and used to make a difference.
Amazing. Okay.
And my goal is that not only sharing that story is part of your healing journey, but also then part of a system's healing journey too.
Okay. And is there any level of anonymity to it if somebody wanted that? Or is there, where does it go? Where does the story go?
Thank you for asking that. I've committed that everything is anonymous. So everything is de-identified information. Your name is never included. We analyze the information, but there is no identifying information at all in that.
Is there anything that would allow some type of support if somebody is looking for some level of recognition, community support, some level of healing?
Great question. We have social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Story of Strength, and there are communities to find there. There's also resources that we've put. In fact, there was a post last week where we put resources if you're looking for specific. There's a postpartum hemorrhage support group on Facebook, and I found it incredibly useful. So there are definitely some of those communities if you're looking for them, and we've put some of those resources up as well.
Perfect. And we'll be sharing all of those in the show notes as well. Okay. So now to the next question. What else can we do to support you moving forward with the data collection that could affect change?
The next thing I am looking for is investment. And that investment will fuel gathering even more stories as well as designing a future study. So collecting the stories is qualitative data, and that's an amazing step we've taken. There's opportunity in the future to move toward interviews as well so that we can probe deeper on some of these specific experiences too. So this is just the beginning.
I am so excited for you. I'm excited that you are using all of the tools at your disposal to affect this level of change. I think that you are uniquely equipped to do this level of work. How would somebody reach out to you if they were interested in getting involved on that level?
You can contact me via the website as well. And I'm sure that via this podcast, there's ways to get in touch too. So reach out. I'd love to be in touch with others who experience stories that are relevant and also want to be part of the movement, because really this is inspiring a movement.
Jenny, how do you define hope?
What a great question. A belief that there's something greater coming.
I like that. I like that a lot of times when I ask people that question, the answer is very broad and flowing, and you're very succinct. What have you learned about yourself in this process in creating Story of Strength?
The first is that I learned I could. It was an idea. And as you said, I had a unique approach that it's not just collecting the stories, but also using my education and experience to analyze them. And I did, and I could. And I guess that goes back to the confidence piece that we talked about, believing in myself. And I hope everyone listening can take that and believe in themselves too. And I mentioned the second was that I'm stronger than I ever knew. And that carries me through all the time, because it might sound like I then have confidence and no fear. And the reality is that's just not the case. I was telling my husband yesterday about how I'm writing up a blog post on imposter syndrome because imposter syndrome struck me again, and it'll keep striking. So I think that I have to keep relearning that I'm stronger than I know and keep remembering the confidence that I've learned.
I feel like you and I are the same person. What does your daughter think about this work you are doing and this work that was ultimately inspired by her birth experience?
First, my daughters are 7 and 9. So I do want to inspire hope as well by saying that I did go on to have a second pregnancy. And I made sure that for the second pregnancy, everyone knew my history and we were prepared should any complications arise. They did not arise in the same way. The only problem I had was my second child was sunny side up. And so that was a little bit harder to push. But other than that, all smooth. So it is possible. I get that question a lot. Is it possible to have another? I went to a different physician. I went to a high-risk hospital. I made sure all the experts were ready. And yes, it's possible. So my children know that mommy's very passionate about my work. I really like to support others. And they'll even sometimes, I'm at my home office right now, they'll even sometimes come in the background and see what I'm doing. And I think they're still learning exactly, especially my older daughter, Evelyn, what that means around the unique circumstances of her birth. I don't think she fully understands it yet, the movement that she's inspired. And I hope she continues to understand that as she grows up. Right now, I think she knows that mommy connects with lots of people and likes to make a difference. And that comes even when we're at the dinner table and all talking about what we've done that day. And I hope she'll live with that passion in her life as well.
I love that. You know, it's funny. I was asked the same question because I also went on to have a second, but I came out of surgery. And as I was waking up from surgery, my husband was on the phone with my best friend going, she's a trooper. And yeah, if she doesn't want to have a second, we don't have to have a second. Like that was enough. And I did go on to have a second. I did use the same doctor. And she said to me, we're going to induce you so that I can be 100% in control of everything. And so that I can be prepared. She did say to me at the time, I think I mentioned to you, had I known you were a real redhead, I might have expected it because redheads tend to bleed and have additional complications. But I legitimately, my delivery with my son was so easy. I pushed one time and she made me laugh and he came out and she just put him right on my stomach. So we joke about how he was laughed into the world. So after I had him, I thought, well, this is why people have multiple children, because if this is how it is for other people, then this is why. Had I had him first, then, but yeah, I mean, there are, thank goodness, many non-complicated births. And I'm really grateful for the work you do that shares the stories and collects the data for the ones that are not, so that we can, as a society, do the work to bring us even further down the road of creating an even safer maternal health environment. So, is there anything I did not ask you that you would like to share with everyone?
The last thing I want to share is I also realized that obviously I have a passion for women's health and improving women's health outcomes, but I realized that these stories didn't have to be specific to women's health, that they could actually be any challenge that people went through and found their inner strength and their authenticity. And so I actually wrote up this experience and the method I have of open leadership using curiosity, empathy, and connection, and wrote that into a book, and it'll be coming out this October. So the book is called Open Up. So check that out in October.
Oh, I love that. Well, what I would love for you to do is make sure that you share that with me so that I can update show notes, so that as people continue to listen to episodes of the podcast, that will be in show notes, and I would be happy to share that when it comes out too. So congratulations on the book. That is very exciting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your light and your experience and your story of strength.
I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone knows that they're not alone and your story matters.
Thank you so much for being here, Jenny. I really appreciate it. And thank you, friends, for spending this time with us, for allowing us to bring some hope to visit for you if you have found this episode inspiring and we have met you where you are. I hope that you will turn around and share it with the people that you know and love, and that you will come back and join us again on future episodes between now and then. Do take care of yourself, and thank you for being here with us.
Naturally, it's important to thank the people who support and sponsor the podcast. This episode is supported by Chris Dully, a trusted criminal defense attorney and friend of mine here in St. Louis, who believes in second chances and solid representation. Whether you're facing a DWI, felony, or traffic issue, Chris handles your case personally, with clarity, compassion, and over 15 years of experience. When things feel uncertain, it helps to have someone steady in your corner. Call 314-384-4000 or 314-DUI-HELP, or you can visit dullylawfirm.com to schedule your free consultation.